Man, the west coast of Portugal is so pretty this time of year. Hey folks, it's Indieguy. Have you guys ever played a game based on the movie or even a TV show? Unfortunately, I have. They're almost always rushed cash grabs, devoid of even a morsel of soul.
But look at that, it's Tony Soprano, you like Gabagool, right?
But from time to time, a gem would grace us with their presence, like GoldenEye 64, Spider-Man 2, Chronicles of Riddick, and so on. But the game that surprised me the most for how genuinely good and out of the box it is Peter Jackson's King Kong, not the video game but the official game of the movie, which is the biggest mouthful of a game title since Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc Chapter of the Holy Demon War. These are both real titles, by the way, the jokes write themselves at this point. Let's start with the plot of the game. The story takes place in the early 1930s and you play as Jack Driscol, a famous Broadway screenwriter that was hired by the filmmaker Carl Denham, played by Jack Black, to write the plot of a film that was supposedly to be shot in Singapore. But in reality, it was in the mysterious, forgotten and faraway island called Skull Island. After a rough landing, you and some of the ship's crew, along with the film crew, go deeper into uncharted lands, discovering ancient ruins of a forgotten civilization. They also find fucking dinosaurs for some reason, and Darrow, the main actress, gets kidnapped by the big monkey himself, and it is your job to bring her back and leave the island for good. Now, the game somewhat loosely follows the plot of the movie, but honestly, I prefer it that way. By not following the movie to a T, there is more creative liberty to make the game more fun. It doesn't restrict the developers and instead gives them broad guidelines on story beats and locations that they can shape to match whatever the pace of the game is, and I love that approach. But what do I think of the movie itself? Well, I'm not really a movie reviewer, but I actually really like it. It is, though, a little bit too long, coming in at 3 fucking hours. But I do have to give it to Jack Black, though. This was a weird role for him to portray, but he did a stellar job. But how do you turn King Kong into a video game? Well, at least what Ubisoft thought of doing was turning it into an FPS. Don't worry, they weren't evil at this point in time. But this is a very weird FPS system. For you to be able to shoot, you first have to draw your gun by holding down L2. But doing so looks goofy as hell. Weirdly enough though, it works surprisingly well. This mechanic never got in the way, it was never cumbersome or weird to use, which is a surprising turn of events. Usually mechanics like this never end up well, and even aiming down sights does not feel bad. Mostly because you won't be using it though. This game doesn't have a huge arsenal though. You have 4 guns and you'll be able to pick up bone spears and normal ones. And you're only able to carry 1 gun and 1 spear type at a time. And if you have a spear, you have to use it before you can use your gun. And for a lot of encounters, you'll be using mostly spears, since guns and by extent ammo are a lot more rare. So having a gun is almost a luxury. Sometimes shooting a gun even feels wrong, not because of the shooting itself, but it's like you're wasting something that you'll need in the future. But now, how do the weapons feel? As I said, you have bone spears and kind of like hunting ones, so let's start with those. Normal spears do a nice amount of damage and are the more durable ones. The downside is that they come in limited numbers and are a lot more rare than bone spears. Now, the bone spears don't deal a ton of damage and they can break pretty easily, but they're very common, being basically infinite, and they can get you out of a scuffle, but essentially they're in game so you don't softlock yourself by running out of ammo and hunting spears. As for the guns, you have a pistol, a shotgun, a sniper rifle, and a Tommy gun. And they feel adequate, I guess. Yeah, they're luxuries, but the pistol and the Tommy gun feel weak. They take far longer than you'd expect to kill. Especially the Tommy gun, that on top of that is super rare, meaning not a ton of ammo. The sniper and the shotgun though feel really nice. The shotgun is great for close range, which you're in luck seeing as this game relies a ton on it. The sniper is obviously great for longer ranges, but also is pretty damn good for close range. It does come with a very situational scope that honestly is kind of redundant for the majority of the time you'll be using the gun, but at least it is still very usable without it. Even with these 2 weapons, I do think that weapon roster should be a bit bigger. There should be maybe 1 or 2 more guns for you to play around with. Maybe a double barrel shotgun or even a revolver would be nice. But there's just something to the way that you find both the spears and the guns that is
just really immersive. For the bones, you'll find them in these animal carcasses or from these piles of discarded bone. Man, this sounds like a Cannibal Corpse song. The normal spears will most likely be found stuck to the ground, but very rarely you'll find them impaling human skeletons tied to poles. And the guns can only be found in these airdropped care packs. So believe it or not, these things contribute to the game's atmosphere and help flesh out the world.
Lastly, at times you'll be accompanied by some NPCs that you can interact with.
The majority of them just talk to you, but if they have a spear or even a gun, they can trade with you. So if you see an NPC that has a gun that you want, you can just go up to them and trade with them. A nice little touch.
You wanna know how this game is even more weirdly fleshed out? Well, with its enemy roster. You have huge insects, huge bat-like creatures, and even fucking dinosaurs. The insects come in 3 flavors. These things called the scorpiopedes, the megapedes, and the kunai predator, which I guess aren't insects and are crustaceans, but I don't fucking care, they're the bugs of the sea. These are your basic enemies. Easy to kill, but there are a lot of them. The bat creatures are the Pteropus mordax. The bat creatures are the Pteropus mordax. They come in different sizes, some very small, others very big, even being considered bosses. They serve the obligatory role of annoying flying enemy, but they aren't bad per se. They are actually pretty well used throughout the game. Yeah, I know, I'm getting to the dinosaurs. Enemy-wise, you only have 3 types. The V-Rexes, the Venetosauruses, and the Udosaurs. Udosaurs are your basic water enemy that gets used like 3 times. But the Venetosauruses are closer to our idea of a Jurassic Park raptor. And they come in 2 variants, the small and the big ones. The big species is huge, tanky, and surprisingly fast. To top it all off, most of the times they come in small packs, making them pretty scary. Especially when you don't have that much ammo or don't have a gun at all. The smaller guys are easier to deal with, obviously, but that doesn't mean that they don't pose a threat. They are even faster and come in bigger groups than their larger counterparts. So, watch your flanks. Finally, we have the V-Rex, the big boy himself. Now, again, there are 2 types, the unkillable adults and the killable but still pretty tough adolescents. The parts with the adults are nerve-wracking. You usually have to keep them at bay by distracting them or stunning them. I actually love these parts, they really amp up the tension. The adolescents sadly get used a total of like 3 times throughout the game, which is sad. They're a nice step up from the large Venetosauruses. But the real question is, just how do these creatures flesh out the world? Well, you see, these monsters weren't just made specifically for this game. They already existed in the world of the movie, and they were all included in the book The World of Kong, A Natural History of Skull Island. A pretty in-depth look at the fauna and parts of the flora of Skull Island. Now, some sizes have been exaggerated for gameplay purposes, but bringing stuff like this that barely showed up in the movie is really cool.
Yeah, I put this off for long enough. The truth is that the game is only part FPS. The other part is spent playing with Kong. That sounds a bit like a euphemism. But yeah, in select parts you can play as Kong himself. You go from a rather slow and even horror-like setting to an action-packed kaiju game. The enemies that gave you difficulties with Jack are at best mini-bosses and at worst just used as skipping stones. Kong feels like an absolute beast, just as he should. And his control scheme is also super simple. And I guess because of this, the platforming bits, which of course would exist in a King Kong game, are still super fun to go through. All the way to this 8-meter tall super gorilla is felt. The devs really did a great job. In terms of moves, besides the obvious punch, you also have a grapple, which can be used to pick up and throw enemies. Or just do an Ozzy Osbourne on the bets. R.I.P. Ozzy, you were the GOAT. But you can do a pretty damn cool finisher on the V-Rexes, just like in the movie with the grapple. But to help you defeat them, you have Fury. Now, Fury mode is a sort of a state where you do more damage and where you have an epileptic seizure. Yeah, they could have toned this down a little bit. The downside is that while you're activating it, you'll be exposed to attacks from enemies. So you have to choose the best time to activate it. I love these Kong sections, but you want to know what pisses me off about them? The fact that there are so few of them. The majority of the game is spent with Jack, and honestly those are my favorite parts. But I genuinely wanted to see more of these Kong beat-em-ups. I'm not asking for a different campaign for Kong since I think the levels would start to overstay their welcome, but a few more sprinkled throughout the game probably wouldn't hurt. And this is a bit of a tangent, but honestly, that's the whole game in a nutshell. The game is more or less 5 hours long. It finishes before it gets repetitive or boring, but I think there is a bit of wiggle room for an hour or two of gameplay. And while we're on this note, there is also not a ton of replayability to this game. Sure, you can go back to the other levels so you can unlock the secret ending, but doing that is super easy. I unlocked it after just 10 levels. But besides that, there isn't much to do in this game aside from the 5 hours that are given to you, which is a shame. You know, I like to think of this not only as a game, but also as a playable movie. Everything from it screams just that. Take the screen itself as an example. This isn't just some weird resolution that I was too lazy to deal with in editing. This is how the game is. It comes by default with this letterbox aspect ratio that makes it feel like a movie. Not convinced yet? Okay. Can you point out in the screen where the HUD is? That's right, there isn't one. But the thing is, it isn't necessary. Again, you can only carry one gun and one spear, so changing weapons is a non-existent problem. No need for menus or visual clutter. The only situation where a HUD would be necessary is in checking your ammo count. You'd think that. And you'd think wrong. If you press the circle button, Jack will tell you how much ammo he has. Sure, he won't tell you how many bullets you have, but you don't really need a precise overview of your ammo at all times. Oh yeah, the health thing. I guess this is the only other situation. If you notice, you don't have a health bar as well. But that's not really an issue since most of the times you just die in 2 hits. And no HUD also means no crosshairs. Which, and I might be sounding like a broken record by now, but you don't really need. Combat most of the times is super close, which means you don't need the visual clutter that other games need. There are also no markers to go anywhere, but most of the times it is completely unnecessary. What you have to do is very well laid out. It's like this game was designed to be a visual experience that you can play and immerse yourself, and not just a movie tie-in game made to cash in on the property. Obviously there are some things like small pop-ups that appear from time to time, but at least I can excuse those as being just there to simplify things. Now, if after all this you still want to play this game with a crosshair and a HUD or whatever, I don't really recommend it, but go for it, bucko. It's just sitting in the settings somewhere. But I feel like playing this game with those on is kind of like going on a trip to Italy, and in your stay there you only eat McDonald's. Sure, you're still experiencing Italy, but probably not how the developers intended. Even years after having played this game for the first time, I'm surprised by how good it is. And for the longest time, I couldn't really pinpoint why I liked it so much. That was until I noticed just how cinematic everything is. A movie truly well adapted into game form, a complete rarity. As for the future of the game, we have a saying in Portugal that goes, "You better wait sitting down." This is a movie tie-in. It requires a license to be handled and sold, and God knows where that license is by now. It's probably not in Universal's hands or even in Ubisoft's, which is a blessing in disguise, let me tell you that. But either way, I doubt we'll get the remastered treatment anytime soon. As for the final verdict, the last few games that I reviewed have all been 8s, but fuck it, I guess we'll be adding another one to the roster. 8 out of 10. But yeah, play the game, it's really good, you already know. Also, what do you think about the game? Tell me in the comments. Also, drop a like and a subscribe and the bell thing as well. And that's about it. See ya.
I promise you I'll always be right here. I'm right next to you.